Hey guys, Chop here. In the 3.6 version of Genshin, we were introduced to the Door of Khaenri'ah. On this door is a mysterious symbol of an 8-pointed star. But what does it mean? Where else have we seen it? And what does it mean for the lore of Genshin Impact? I'm going to be making a pretty decent attempt at answering all of these questions and more in this theory video. Before we get to the actual symbol itself and all of the connotations with it, what is this grand door and how do we actually know that it's the door to Khaenri'ah? Well, you could look at the hints that the notes around it give, talking about Dari, accounts of them running away from the kingdom to the above ground of Sumeru, which therefore should mean that where the route to the door, where these notes are found by the way, is the route from Khaenri'ah to Sumeru. However, you can get even less speculative in this almost certain depiction. The viewpoint of the door has the following description. A grand and majestic gate leading to a world beneath the soil. It is sealed tight as of the present, and the once prosperous kingdom that lay behind the door has also long since turned to rubble. Obviously, this once prosperous kingdom is Khaenri'ah, which lays behind the door as the viewpoint description states. The name of this waypoint, by the way, is loosely Zoroastrian, but mainly based on a Persian epic poem, which is mainly famous for being one of the longest ever. In it, the king Afrasiab, which the cave in Genshin is named after, is a hero who lived in a subterranean fortress made of metal, which sounds very much like the destroyed nation in Genshin. Okay, so now that we've established that this is the gate to Khaenri'ah, let's take a look at the symbol on this gate. It's an 8-pointed star in which the points at every 90 degrees are longer than the ones every 45. For now, let's just focus on it being related to Khaenri'ah, before looking at other times it crops up in the game. Well, Khaenri'ah is based on the Old Norse and their mythology. There are many connections you can see for this, such as their names like Halfdan, Dainsleif, etc. You can safely assume in the lore of this game that any piece of information is likely based on something that already exists in the real world. The originality they have comes in with how they gel it all together. So, if Khaenri'ah is based on Old Norse, and this symbol is seen on the door to Khaenri'ah, then where do we see an 8-pointed star in the age of the Vikings? Nowhere, actually. Stars aren't commonly written about, unfortunately, apart from Thor throwing a frozen toe in the sky to make one. No, I'm not joking, that actually is something that happened. We actually don't generally see the number 8 being particularly relevant either, other than the 8-legged horse Sleipnir. There is, however, a popular misconception of something made in 1860 Iceland, but is commonly referenced as being Viking. The Viking compass, Veigvisir. This is a symbol that is mistakenly often used on Viking ships or jewellery or anything important to a Viking. It's a collection of sigils that are intended to magically keep the bearer on the right path, so that they don't get lost even in rough conditions. The most important part of this though is that it has 8 points in the same directions that Genshin's symbol also possesses. Just quick though, before I progress with this point, there is a similar symbol called the Helm of Ore, which is an 8-pointed symbol to print onto your forehead as a way to magically win any battle. But it's very random and obscure, as well as being Christian anyway, so I doubt it's used by Hoyoverse for this. So, if Khaenri'ah does indeed have the symbol of Khaenri'ah as the Veigvisir, then what does it really mean for them? As I said already, it means that wherever this symbol is, then that person or thing will not get lost and will stay on the right path in new territory. Basically, this symbol magically blesses them to continue on their fate and not be steered away from home. We can go deeper with the theories on this and not just its etymology, but for that we need to look at where else this symbol appears in the game. Obviously, all things Khaenri'ah feature this. Halfdan wears it, Alberich adorns it, the Ruin Graders seem to have it around their eye, etc. However, it does show up elsewhere too. Perhaps the most prominent one is Mona, who has it come up in some of her attacks, and it may be the symbol that she wears, although it's not all too clear if it's just the 4-pointed star that she has elsewhere in her design, with a little extra decoration or not. It's also featured in the Hexen Circle cutscene as well though, and these last 2 appearances are obviously very connected with the notion of fate, perhaps even symbolising it. The question then arises, of course, that overshadows the entire theory before this. Why is the symbol of Khaenri'ah the same as the symbol that seems to represent fate? What relation do the Dari have with the omnipresent theme in the bigger picture of the lore? Well, For that, we're going to have to paint a picture of what life was like in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago. Firstly, let's look at a piece of information that we learned in 3.6. In an account titled Someone's Abandoned Letter, it is written that Khaenri'ah has 4 prosperous pillars of their kingdom. It also talks about spying on secrets from beyond the sky and calls the world hollow. So, what are the 4 pillars to their kingdom? Again, looking into Norse mythology, there is actually a minor detail regarding 4 pillars of their world. The 4 corners of the sky are said to be held up by 4 dwarves: Austri, Vestri, Nordri, and Sudri. You may somewhat recognise the names, and that would be because they are actually the names that eventually became East, West, North, and South. So, the 4 dwarves holding up the sky are the names of the 4 primary points of a compass. Although, we've already talked about a compass in this theory, the Vegvisir, the Viking compass. 4 of those points are represented by the 4 dwarves. Also, it may be useful to note here that the dwarfs are from the underground realm of darkness, Svartalfheim. Dwarves are usually depicted as amazing craftsmen, especially of weapons. I've mentioned before my Caribert theory how Khaenri'ah is likely based on Svartalfheim because of these connections to it being subterranean, shrouded in darkness, and the people being great craftsmen of weapons. It does make a lot of sense that the 4 pillars of Khaenri'ah would be represented on their nation's symbol, so honestly, it just reinforces the connections I've made even further. In addition to this, if we just think about how the dwarves held up the sky, what if that's still the case in Genshin? If the sky is held up in Khaenri'ah by their 4 pillars, then the real sky would be beneath the world. The world which is said in this letter to be hollow. The original Khaenri'ahns had dug underground, found the hollow world below, and the real sky that lies there. Again, this is yet another thing among many that keep pointing towards to that being upside down. The spiral abyss going up as you get deeper, the chasm city being upside down, the Adventurers Guild motto being that they go towards the stars and the abyss, and now this. Okay, so painting the image that the nation is upside down and has 4 pillars represented in their symbol, let's look at some other points. One is the title given to Dainsleif. He's called the Twilight Sword. The sword part of this title relates to his namesake, because Dainsleif, in Norse mythology, is an enchanted sword that kills anyone it hits. The Twilight part is also a little interesting. See, most people know of Ragnarok, which is the end of all things in Old Norse belief. It's a massive war between the gods and the giants where both sides lose, and everyone and everything dies. Ragnarok translates to the destiny or fate of the gods. This is the word used to describe this end in the modern depictions of their world, and for good reason, because it's the word used in most of the Poetic Edda. However, throughout the Prose Edda, and once in the Poetic Edda, the word used is instead Ragnarokr. This is a slightly different translation. It means the twilight of the gods, and this is where Dainsleif's title comes from. He is the sword that kills everyone it hits, with the twilight part meaning the end of the gods. It can also be interesting to think of Ragnarok with the meaning of destiny or fate, which we've already talked about being related to the symbol of Khaenri'ah. This doesn't really depict the physical state of the nation very well, but it does hint at some intentions they seem to have before the Cataclysm, and perhaps even just the imagery of the Cataclysm resembling that of Ragnarok. The final point I want to hit on for the depictions of Khaenri'ah is what is read in the description of an item we got after the Sumeru Conquest. The silver twig is the commemoration item we got for this accomplishment, and it has a very important piece of lore in it. It reads the following. A sage hanging upside down on a tree had acquired the knowledge of how to inscribe runes and control sacred words, and thus followed the kingdom established along the tree's roots, eventually gaining a glimpse of the secret of the cosmos. This is a story based on the Norse tale on how Odin learned about rune magic. See, men would sacrifice people through hanging for Odin, so Odin sacrificed himself to himself by hanging off of the world tree Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is the basis for the world tree in Genshin, so whoever this sage is that is hanging from the world tree is therefore Odin in the story who learns about rune magic through self-sacrifice. Whoever they are created Khaenri'ah along the roots of the world tree. This is the original king of the nation, the original King Irmin, named after Irmin's Hull, the world tree. It could even be King Ermin himself, depending how far you want to go with the immortality theory I've made videos on before now. I mean, Ermin is an alternative name for Odin, so it could make sense. Regardless though, this first king of Khaenri'ah made the kingdom on the tree roots of Irminsul's roots. And what's interesting is that if we recall where I mentioned the 4 pillars of this kingdom, that this king presumably established, are 4 points on their symbol. Well, if that's the case, and the kingdom is built in a symbol that represents fate by the king who knows how to inscribe runes, then Khaenri'ah itself could be a rune inscription for fate itself. This fake Visir symbol was mistakenly inscribed on all things they wanted to keep on track and not get lost, which sounds like what this first king has also done. He's inscribed it on the door to Khaenri'ah, many of the Dari seem to adorn it, the Abyss Order has it everywhere, their machines, and possibly even the kingdom itself. There is something else we can extract from this though. It mentions how it's built on the roots of Irminsul. Now, this probably means that the kingdom is just built underground, i.e. the roots. But it could also be a hint of something I mentioned in my last video. In it, I talked about Nibelung, the Dragon King, being someone that helped Khaenri'ah with either the Abyss or Forbidden Knowledge. This is mainly due to his name being Norse, which means that he should belong to Khaenri'ah. So, where do we see a dragon in Norse mythology? Probably the most famous case is Nidhoggur. This is a dragon that nibbled on the roots of Yggdrasil. Whoa, the roots of the World Tree? As in the roots that Khaenri'ah is supposedly built on? There should be a dragon in Khaenri'ah because they're both on the roots of Irminsul. So again, this just reinforces the theory I've mentioned previously about Nibelung helping them. Nibelung is based on the dragon Nidhoggur. Okay, so I know I've gone on quite the zigzag route to answer the question raised about how the symbol of Khaenri'ah relates to the symbol of fate, but we now have a lot more information about the nation to use in order to answer it. It is a kingdom established on the roots of Irminsul, built by a king that inscribed it with a rune. He worked with the Dragon King Nibelung to progress them even quicker to bring an end to the gods using Dainsleif and their other weapons. Their 4 pillars help establish them as a rune, but also hold them up, and they may even be upside down. So how does it relate to the symbol we've seen, presumably representing fate? We know that the king learned how to inscribe runes, so he should know how to inscribe the rune of fate if it were to exist. He may have inscribed it throughout the entire nation, or even as the nation itself, to keep Khaenri'ah enthralled in fate. Just like Mona and her hydromancy that reads fate, just like the Hexenzirkel that go on adventures to Irminsul to research fate, and just like the Abyss Order who have the Loom of Fate. Perhaps it's a protective rune that keeps the bearer under fate's protection. Perhaps it even allows the bearer to have some control over destiny or fate. Whichever way you look at it, Khaenri'ah had some connection to fate. They knew about it, maybe even desiring a way to control it so that they could topple the divine throne. It's important to keep this in mind as we see this symbol crop up more and more. Whenever you see it, immediately you should think of fate. Fontaine is coming up, and it will have a lot of implications to Celestia, as well as Nicole probably coming in somewhere in the Fontaine Archon quests. Nicole is a Hexenzirkel member, who is a, and I quote, guide who will never get lost. Sounds a lot like Vague Visir. She has a lot to do with fate as well, so we should be seeing this in the coming months. The reason I'm saying that she'll appear in Fontaine, by the way, is because she talked to us at the end of Sumeru, and her name is the female version of Nicholas, which is a French name, and obviously France is the basis for Fontaine. So, when this inevitably occurs, look out for this symbol, because I'm pretty sure we'll see it there, and we may get to look at the fate of Teyvat a little deeper, which should tell us even more about this symbol of Khaenri'ah. I got inspired to do this theory because of the door to Khaenri'ah, which really excited me even though we couldn't go in. This and the Nidhoggur part of the theory is the main reason I decided to do this theory at this stage of 3.6, but that's kind of it for the lore of this version. The only other lore in 3.6 that I haven't talked about in either this or my last theory video about the Snake Ring is very obvious things that don't really go too deep. I could talk about the dead gods that made up the new area, stopping the demons from invading Teyvat, but there's no theories to that, it's just fact. The only theories left to make in 3.6 is about a lot of stuff we learned about Fontaine, so I'll definitely be making a theory about Fontaine's Archon quest soon. Until then, however, chop out. Bye.